Hey guys, Jan here, codingwithjan.com. Today we're up for some fun stuff. I want to show you how to implement product details on a variant level. So for this example, I'm going to be using this coffee blend here. As you can tell, we have one main description, but then for each blend, we are displaying some additional details down below. And of course, this is just one example. This could also be electronic devices where you need to display technical specs, or supplements where you need to display nutrition tables and proteins and whatnot. For someone like me as deep in the fitness game, that's a very relatable example. Or maybe fashion items with different instructions on how to wash them, or materials or whatever. So tons of different use cases out there. And I also want to highlight that the page is not reloading or anything. All this information is updated on the fly, and you will learn a lot about that in this video. Alright, now here's how this video is going to work. First, I will outline all the problems that we're facing, and then we're going to solve these one by one, step by step, and I will also explain the entire thought process behind them. And I think this is going to be extremely important, because only if you truly understand it, you will be able to adapt this to like any kind of situation and any theme. But if, let's say, you're a store owner and you already have a super busy day, I can also help you find a developer who can get it done for you. But either way, I think even if you have like the slightest technical interest, this is going to be totally worth your time, and we're going to have a ton of fun. So let's dive right in. Okay, so then let's get started with the first challenge. Where do we even store this additional information? Like, we need to find a place where we can add details on a variant level. And the first thing that came to mind was maybe we can just use the customizer. So I'm using the Dawn theme for this demo store here. And then in the product information section, I was just adding a new block. Collapsible row sounded promising, and also moved it above the share button. Thought it looks a bit better. And inside the settings for this block, which might be on the right side for you, depending on screen size, I'm just zooming in so you can read this a bit better. Instead of this check mark, I was using this leaf icon. Called it details. But here we are really facing this first problem, because whatever I put as row content, for example, I could type best coffee blend, it would be the same for all the different variants, right? So whatever variant is selected, the content here would be constant. So we need to find a place where we can add this information here individually for each of the variants. However, I'm still going to leave this as is, because I think this is a good place to showcase the information, and I would just reuse this collapsible row element here. In theory, you can use any element on the page and display your information wherever you want. But yeah, for sake of this demonstration, I think that's a really good place. So I'm actually going to remove the content here, leave it empty, but then save the collapsible row element as is. Okay, now if the customizer is not the right place to add this variant specific information, let's see where else we could add that. And in order to do that, I would navigate to the product editor on the back end. So you can just go to like products and then find your product of choice. And here we have the main description. So this is going to show up right here per default, but we still don't have an additional text field to add like meta information about all the different variants. And even if we click into one of these variants here, we don't see, sorry, there was the image. Even if we click into it, we don't see an additional text field for like a variant description or something. So what we can use here are called Metafields. And Metafields in Shopify allow you to extend any object with like additional fields. So we can use Metafields to create an additional text field on this page here within this editor. And that's what we're going to do next. Okay, probably the fastest way to get there would be using the search bar. So let's type in Metafields. And more specifically, we're interested in creating a variant metafield, right? Because we are looking to extend our variants. We're not looking to extend products. We're not looking to extend page objects or order objects or customer objects or whatever. We're looking to extend variant objects. So let's click right here. And as you can see, right now, I don't have any meta fields in here. You might see some which were like created by other people or apps or whatever, but you can just create a new one. So let's click on add definition, and I would just give it a descriptive name. So this could be coffee details, for example. The name also doesn't matter too much. It's just internally. But what does matter is the namespace and key right here. So this new meta field is going to be created under the namespace custom, and the key is going to be coffee_details. And we will later use that to access the information. But we can also look that up again. You don't have to remember it right now. But yeah, just keep in mind, this is how we're going to access the meta field later on. Then we also have to select a meta field type, like what kind of data is going to be stored in there. And here I'm going to use single line text let's keep it simple because we just want to add a little bit of text for each variant. Okay, validations, we don't need that. Different options, we don't need that. So let's just save everything. And here you can see that we now have our new variant definition. And per default, it's also pinned to the variant. So if I go back to the variant editor, like within the product editor, let me just close this out here. We should now see that for each variant, we have our new meta field down here, which is called coffee details. Yeah, and now we can start entering our text right there. And not to bore you with that, I have all my variant details right here. So I'm just going to copy and paste them from here one by one. Let's do the first one together. So coffee Ethiopia. This is going to be the description. Save it. And yeah, I'm going to repeat that for all the other variants as well. Okay, so far so awesome. First challenge solved. Now we have a place where we can store this additional data. And if you're familiar with Shopify or if you're familiar with Metafields, you might also be aware that with modern themes, 2.0 themes, some meta fields can be directly linked to text fields as a dynamic data source, but unfortunately that doesn't work with variant meta fields. Yeah, for example, it works with meta fields on the product level. So we got to find a different way here. And this is going to be our next big challenge. How can we display the right information based on the variant that was selected? Okay, now this is a complex problem. Why is it complex? Because there are a lot of things happening at once, right? We gotta replace this text here based on the variant that was selected with the data from our meta field all at once. Like, where do we even start with that, right? Sounds overwhelming. But what do engineers do if they have a complex problem? They break it down into smaller steps. Yeah, that was actually one thing that was very useful to learn during my engineering degree. Like, if you have a complex problem, just break it down into the tiniest pieces possible and then solve them one by one. So let's analyze together what needs to happen in order to make this work. First, we gotta be able to detect when a variant is changed, right? Because we wanna react to this, we wanna do something if a variant changes. So we gotta be able to detect this in the first place. Now, how are we going to detect this? Most likely by using JavaScript. That's the thing I see with our students a lot. Sometimes people get confused whether they should be using Liquid or JavaScript. And as a rule of thumb, we can say Liquid can only do things before the page loads, and JavaScript can do things after the page has already loaded. And in this case, yeah, the page is clearly loaded. We are reacting to user input, right? The user clicking on these buttons here. So that's after the page is loaded. So we need to use JavaScript for that. Then it would also be helpful to know which variant was selected specifically, right? Because if someone clicks Colombia, I want to load the data for the Colombian coffee. And if someone clicks on Vietnam, I want to be able to load the data for the Vietnamese coffee. So not only do we need to detect this change in variant, we also need to detect which one specifically. Okay, then after we're able to detect which variant was selected, we need to be able to load the corresponding meta field. Yeah, the meta field we just created that contains the additional details. And this is going to be a bit tricky because here we can't use JavaScript. That would be a bit dangerous because JavaScript can actually be changed by the user. And if JavaScript was able to access like all the data on the store backend, like a malicious user could go in, tweak the JavaScript, and then get all the like confidential information here. So that is something only Liquid can do. Now the problem here, as we said earlier, is that Liquid can only do things before the page loads. So my plan is going to be that I want to put out all these descriptions or all these additional details into a hidden element before the page is loaded. And then after the page is loaded, and if someone like selects a new one, I just want to use JavaScript to grab the hidden information and then put it right here. Because replacing text on the loaded page, that is something we can easily do in JavaScript. Okay, so one more time, we gotta be able to detect when a variant is selected. We gotta be able to tell which variant was selected specifically. With Liquid, we will already have all the data on the page in a hidden element, and then we just grab the correct data depending on the variant that was selected. That's my 4-step action plan. Maybe sounds a bit more complicated than it is, but let's see how that looks in action. All right, so let's get started with the first step. How can we detect when a variant changes? And here I want to draw your attention to the fact that there's already stuff happening when we change a variant. You can see the image updates and the add to cart button refreshes for like a brief second. If one of the variants would be sold out, it would be grayed out, and also read sold out. So it seems that the developers of this theme have already figured out a way to react to this kind of input here. And the idea would be, maybe we can just reuse what they have created and do it in a similar way. So what I want to do next is navigate to my theme files. But before we do that, it's always a good idea to duplicate your theme before making any changes. So I'll just click these 3 dots here, duplicate, and then a theme copy will be initiated down below. And especially if you're working on a live website, it's an even better idea to first work in this theme copy here and then just publish your changes after everything works. Because you don't want to break the live site and then have frustrated visitors. So just make sure to create a theme copy and then we can work right in there. So what I want to do next is click these 3 dots and then edit code. This will bring up Shopify's internal theme editor. And within the assets folder, we usually find most of the theme's JavaScript code. Yeah, remember earlier we said here we are reacting to user input after the page is loaded. So we want to use JavaScript. And inside, let me see, where's that file? In Dawn, it is called global.js, which contains most of the functions. So that would be a good starting point. And in here, I'm trying to find any keywords related to variant, variant changing, variant change. So we can just use Control and F to bring up the search bar. And let's see if we can find any keyword related to variant. Okay, so this is a comment. Not so relevant. Next. Here it reads class variant select. That sounds kind of promising. And inside this element here, we even find a method or a function that is called onVariantChange. And especially with this naming convention here, on something happens, that's usually used for events. And let's see what we find inside this function. So we update the options, update the master ID, which we don't need to know what that means for now. Update pickup availability, remove error messages. A bit further down, update product media, update product info. So all this sounds very promising, and it might be that we're already in the right place. So what we can do here is try to extend this, maybe right after all the product images, the URL, and so on and so forth are being updated. And for now, let's just write the following. Let me zoom in here a bit so we can read this better. We can write console.log and then variant has changed. Okay, semicolon at the end, and then save this. And now, since we're working in a development theme now, we also got to make sure that we preview the right theme, that we preview our theme copy, where we make all the changes. So let's preview that. And on the product page, I will just right-click somewhere, inspect, and this will bring up the Chrome developer tools. So on the left side here, you can see all the HTML elements. They also get highlighted on the page as I hover over them. On the right side, you can see some of the CSS rules, the styling rules, but we're not interested in that right now. We are interested in the JavaScript console. So we can switch to this tab here. And now let's see what happens when we change a variant. So I'm switching from Ethiopia to Colombia. And inside the JavaScript console, we see this logged message, variant has changed. Yeah, we can also do this several times, like 1, 2, 3, 4. And now we can see that it's logged 5 times, including the first time we changed it. So every time a variant changes, we're able to print this message here. Awesome, because now we're able to react to this event. Okay, now next it would be awesome to know which variant was changed, right? Because if the Colombian coffee was selected, we also got to be able to load the corresponding information. So back in the theme files, I actually want to see how they implemented some of these functions here. Like how do they update the product media? Because in order to do that, they would also need to know which variant was selected. So down here, we can find all these implementations. This is like the script that gets executed every time the variant changes in order to update the media. And one thing that jumps at me here is that it seems they have access to an object called this.currentVariant. So I would actually just copy this and then scroll back up to our console log statement. And down below, I want to type console.log. And this time not in quotes, because we want to print an object here. Quotes is only if you want to print text. And then I will paste this.currentVariant. Semicolon, and then save it. So now every time a variant changes, we should see this message here. And we should also see this object, and then we can take a look at what data is contained in there. Okay, so back on the front end, quick refresh. And then I'll bring up the Chrome developer tools again, JavaScript console. Let's change a variant. I'll change it from Vietnam to Colombia. So now we see the variant has changed. And down below, we can find the object, which is called current variant or whatever it was called. I would need to look it up now. We can even unfold this. And here we find a bunch of information about this selected variant, like its availability, the barcode if there was one, the price in cents, the title. And one thing that seems very interesting here is the variant ID, which is a unique ID that helps us to identify which variant was selected. Now you might be thinking, okay, maybe we could also use the title, Colombia, but the title might also change over time, or there might be another variant on a different product, which is also called Colombia. So in programming, it's oftentimes good practice to rather stick with unique IDs that don't change over time. Okay, now with everything we've discovered so far, we can now work on replacing this text here. We will not be able to replace it with the meta field right away because, as we mentioned earlier, we still need to put that out in a hidden element and so forth. But we can already work on like finding this element here, and then maybe we can just put the variant ID in here first and then later replace it with the real text. So what I want to do next is go back to the theme files. And in order to do this a little more structured, I want to stick with the implementation they used right here. So I will create a new function as well. This.update variant details, for example. Descriptive names is always a good idea if you need to read back on it later or another developer works on the project. So this.update variant details, and the implementation is going to be down below, so we can just do it on top here. So update variant details, a pair of parentheses, and then a pair of curly brackets. And everything we want to do, or everything that needs to happen, can be implemented in this function here. So I will grab what we already have. And in case this was confusing, let me explain this one more time. So according to the convention they used here, where they have like one function for each of the things that needs to update, like update the product media, update the URL, update the variant input, render product info, I also want to have one function that updates the variant details. Right? This is super easy to read and everything here gets executed once a variant changes. And then the actual implementation is down here. So everything that needs to happen, yeah, we can pretty much add right here. Hope that makes sense so far. Okay, now with our new function right here, we now have to find a way to replace the content. Let me add that as a comment here. Replace content. I'm speaking about the content of this collapsible element here. Right? Every time a variant changes, we want to replace this content. And that means we need to find a way to grab this element in our JavaScript code and then replace the text inside. Okay, now in order to grab this inside our JavaScript code, I want to give it a unique name or unique identifier. So back in our theme files, I will now bring up a new file. It is going to be a section file. And it's going to be the, let me just read through the names here. Main product.liquid. So this is going to be the product page. Okay, so let's open that. And now I want to find this collapsible row element. So maybe we can just find it like that. Collapse. Okay, so let's read this together. When there's a collapsible tab, we want to put out this accordion element, and there might be a title. There might be a small icon, our small leaf, remember? And down here we have the block's content. Yeah, pretty much the block content. And in here, for sake of simplicity, I will add a new div element. A div is just a container. And I will give it an ID equals to, let's do variant detail or variant details. Okay? And then inside our JavaScript code, we will be able to reference this element by the name here, or by the ID, better to say. I can also show you that on the front end. So maybe for now we can just add a little test here. Save this. And the next time we refresh the front end, we should already see our small test element right here. And you can also inspect that with the Chrome developer tools. And this is pretty much what we just typed into the theme files, a small div element of ID variant details, and it's inside this accordion element. For reference, theme files again, accordion element, and our small test element inside. Okay, so now back into the JavaScript file. Let's see how we can grab this element here. So global.js, this is our function that we just created, update variant details. And here where we wrote replace content, we're gonna grab this text element now. So we can say const for creating a new variable, and let's call it variant details text element. A very long and very descriptive name, but I want to make this stupid simple here so that we can later read up on this and still know what each variable was meant for. So variant details text element, and this is going to be equal to document query selector and then parentheses. And here we have to enter the name of our element, or better to say the identifier, right? We used ID variant details. So a pair of quotes, and then a hashtag indicates ID variant details. Okay. Semicolon at the end. So now this variable here holds a reference to this element. And if we want to replace the content, we can just use this name here, or this new variable here, and then say dot inner HTML and set it to whatever text we want. So for example, we could say we just changed the text. Okay, so one more time. Every time a variant changes, all these functions here are called, and also our update variant details function. And when this function here is called, we log this text to the console, we log this variant object that contains all the different information, and we also grab the text element. Maybe this wouldn't have to happen like every time. It would be enough if we grab this once, but for simplicity, we leave it now. And then we change the content to the following text here. Okay, we just changed the text. Let's save that and see if it works. So next refresh on the front end. Variant is selected to Columbia. Details tab is right here with our default text test. And then if we change it, it reads, we just changed the text. How awesome is that? And if you bring up the Chrome developer tools, you can also see our console log statements still worked. So the variant has changed, yes. And here's the variant object containing like Vietnam, the price, the variant ID. So all the information we have available. Okay, now back in the JavaScript, obviously we don't just want to change the text to we just changed the text. This should be a bit more dynamic and should actually be the meta field that we created on the variant in the very beginning. But for now, let's just use something that's a little more dynamic. Let's use the variant ID. So we can actually use this object here, this .currentVariant, and then .id. And let's save that as well. And on the front end, we're still starting with our default test here. But now when I select a new variant, we should see the variant ID. That's an awesome step in the right direction because it's already pretty dynamic. And now we just have to find a way to grab the corresponding meta field based on this ID here. All right, off to the last missing piece of the puzzle. How can we load the meta field content based on the current selected variant's ID? And by the way, if you're still watching, honestly, I'm your biggest fan. Most people couldn't do that. And I will do my best to break this down as clearly as possible for you. So stick with me. We already have the ID of the variant that was just selected. Awesome. And our life would be so easy if we had a hidden element that maps the ID to the content or to the details that we put inside the meta field. So a hidden element like that could look as follows. It could look like the product ID for the first variant and then colon. So the first element could be Colombian coffee is the best. Right? The second entry would then be the next ID and then Vietnam coffee is great. So an object in this format here would be very easy to pass in JavaScript. And based on the ID that was just selected, like based on the variant that was just selected, we could just look up the corresponding data. And also good to know, this format here, or this notation, this way of writing things down, is called JSON. It's like a standardized format, and it's actually very easy to read in JavaScript. So yeah, let's work on creating an element like that, and then I'll show you how to read this right here, and then yeah, replace the text in our collapsible element with whatever we just read from here. Okay, so this hidden element can live at the bottom of our product page. So I'm going back to the main product liquid, and then I will scroll down all the way to the bottom. Or not exactly all the way to the bottom. Let me show you where I will stop. Pretty long file, gotta admit. I will stop in front of this schema tag here. The schema tag is where all the customizer settings are implemented. We don't need that for now, but this is where the actual page ends, and this is a good place to store our data. So right before this schema tag here. Okay, I will start by adding a script tag. And this script tag, so that I can later find it in my JavaScript code, also needs an ID. And let's use something very descriptive. So it could be variant Metafield data. Okay, pretty straightforward. And we can also specify the type of the script tag. It's going to be application/JSON, right? The structured format I just showed you. Okay, and now we can work on writing down this structured data here that I showed you in my notepad. I think we should also add quotes here. Let's do that. And let's see what we got here. So we start with a pair of curly brackets. And then for every variant, we want to write down the variant ID, the Metafield content, and a comma if there's another entry down below. So you could also say we always want to add a comma unless it's the last element. This is just how the JSON format works. So let's translate what I just said into code. We start with a pair of curly brackets. So far, so easy. And now for every variant in the product.variants, whenever we start a for loop, we also have to terminate it down below. So end for. And what do we want to do for each of the variants? In quotes, we want to put out the variant.id colon. And then we want to put out the content of that meta field. And because this is going to be a little longer in terms of a statement, we can also assign one variable above for better readability. So we can say assign meta field content, which is equal to the variant.metafields. And this is where the namespace for our meta field comes into play for the first time. So variant.metafields.custom.coffee_details. That's what I called it. Let me show you this right here. So in the very beginning, when we defined this coffee details meta field, namespace and key were custom.coffee_details. So that's exactly what I'm referencing here. Okay, so now I have the content of this meta field in my new variable. And I can use it down here. So again, in quotes, let's put out the meta field content. So this already looks close to my notepad, right? Variant ID colon meta field content. And then I also want to add a comma, but we said unless it's the very last item in the document, right? We always want to add a comma unless it's the last element. So we can translate that into code pretty much word for word. So unless it's the last element of our for loop.last, we want to add this comma here and then end unless after it. End unless. Okay, let me read this one more time. We have our script tag with the data. We start with a pair of curly brackets. And then for every variant in the product variants, we put out the ID in quotes, and we put out the meta field content, And then we also add a comma at the end, unless it's like the last element in that for loop. It's not too difficult if you know how to read this. Okay, once we're done with that, let's save this. Let's also copy this ID here so we can find this element. And first I want to check what it looks like on the front end. So refresh the page. You can also do a quick sanity check, like the element doesn't appear anywhere, right? It's a hidden script tag, but we can still find it if we just inspect the page. And in here you can also press Ctrl and F as in find, and then we can just search for this ID here. So here's our script tag. Let's unfold it. And you can see that our data is pretty much structured in the way we wanted it. So we have the curly brackets and then all the variant IDs followed by their meta field content. And also one quick last check here. The last one doesn't contain a comma. Amazing. Okay, we are almost there. So we can close out the product page file here. We don't need that anymore. And now the only thing left to do is in our JavaScript file, where we are trying to replace the content depending on the selected variant, right? We are already grabbing the text element, but we don't want to replace the content with just the ID, right? We want to replace it with the meta field content. So I will go ahead and do that on top. Here we are replacing the content. Maybe we could say grab meta field data, or load. Load is probably a more professional word. We're going to save this in a new variable. Let's call it all variant meta field data. Let's make it as descriptive as possible. And this is going to be equal to json.parse. So we're telling JavaScript we want to read some JSON data here. What data do we want to read? The data inside our hidden element. So I'm using document.querySelector. And how can we reference this element? By its ID. So in quotes, hashtag, and then the element's ID, which I still have in my clipboard. But we don't want to parse the entire element because we don't want to parse these like script tags, literally just the data inside. So we're going to do dot text content. Okay, so we want to parse the JSON data inside our element, but literally just the text, not the entire element. And then we store that in our new variable called all variant meta field data. We can also log this to the console for better, just to make it as clear as possible. Console.log this new variable. Save it. And after the next refresh, let's select a different variant, check the console. So we still have our status message, variant has changed. We are also still logging the variant object. And this one here should be our new meta field data. So let's unfold this and you can see how it's structured. Like all the variant IDs followed by the content of that meta field. And now using this new object here, we can grab the correct description at the position of this ID here. So we can just use the ID to access the specific text. Let me show you what I mean. So down here, where we replace the content of our collapsible row element, right here. Yeah, we don't just want to put out the ID. Doesn't make too much sense. But we want to put out the meta field data that belongs to this ID. So what we can do now is grab our new variable here, all variant meta field data, and then use square brackets to say at the position of this ID here. So we want to replace the text content with the meta field data at the position of this current variant ID. Sounds complicated, and it's also definitely a bit more advanced. But we have super readable variable names, we have comments. So take your time, try to read this, try to understand this. So we're loading all the meta field data, and then we just grab the text element and replace the text with the meta field of the current selected variant. Let's save this and see if it works. And ladies and gentlemen, the next time we refresh the front end, We can open up our details tab here. And once I select the new variant, we see the meta field of that current selected variant. How epic is that? All right, guys, so this was the main thing I wanted to show you. One last thing we should clean up, I think, is on refresh, we still have our default test in here. So it would be good if this was already the meta field of the variant that's selected right now. We can fix it super easily. In order to do that, we just need to go to the main product section right here. And then let's try to find our collapsible row element. Or we can also just search for our test keyword. That should only be right there. Yeah, there we have it. Let's get rid of this. And instead, I want to add a pair of curly brackets and then product.selected or first available variant. Maybe we have that in the suggestions here. Yeah, there we go. Product.selected or first available variant. As the name suggests, this gives us the selected variant. And then dot Metafields, and then our namespace and key dot custom dot coffee underscore details. Okay, and that should already do the trick. Product, selected variant, Metafields, custom coffee details. Save this. Let's see if that also works. One last refresh on the front end. And in the details tab, we should now see the Vietnamese coffee description. Awesome, we did it. Okay, so at this point, it's time to say congrats, you did it. And as a super small outlook, how this could be improved even further, let's have a look at the theme files one more time. So in the JavaScript file, first of all, I would comment out or get rid of all these console log statements. We no longer need these. You can also remove them, but yeah, maybe it might be good for you to have them as a reference here. And also you could raise the question whether, for example, the data needs to be parsed every time that this function here is called, or do we really need to grab the text element every time this function here is called? Because we could also just grab it once, store it in that variable, and then just replace the text when this function here is called. But I think that's a nitpick for now, because I rather want you to focus on understanding the concept, understanding how the data flows, how we react to this event. So I think you can leave it at that, and the video is already long enough. So I just want to say congrats, you did it. All right, and I think with that, we can bring this video here to an end. Let's recap the strategy one more time. I really want to make sure you understand the thought process. So we had this complex problem, and we really solved everything step by step. First, we found a place to store this information. We created a new variant meta field. Then we learned how to detect variant changes. Right? In the global JavaScript file, we also learned how to identify which variant was selected specifically by using the variant ID. Then we learned how to grab this text element here and how to replace its content. And finally, we created our JSON object on the front end that holds all the data. And then by using the variant ID, we just grabbed the correct content or the correct meta field depending on which variant was selected. Wow. That was complicated to explain, but I really wanted to break it down into the tiniest chunks possible so it's easier to digest. Let me know if you have any questions, and I really hope you learned a ton from this. And I also hope you had fun, which might be the most important. Now, if you have questions, leave them in the comment section. If you need more support, check out the links in the description. And I'll say one more time, if you made it to the end, I'm your biggest fan and wish you an amazing rest of your day. I'm gonna get some rest and catch you in the next. Bye.